The idea for a livery for Pender Harbor came about after Rick and I visited the Seattle Center for Wooden Boats. There, for just a few bucks, you could rent a rowboat right off the dock. We thought, wouldn't it be great to be able to share that experience with people in our community? And so that's where the idea of building Double Ender was born. And Rick decided to do a workshop to teach people how to build a double ender. And then it would become part of our livery, hull number 1.
This is the John Salisbury. A drink for the boat, a drink for Neptune, and the rest is for us, the builders. Oh, that was awful.
Here goes to hull number 1 in the Pender Harbor Living Heritage Society's boat livery.
Yes, we started the workshop by setting up the forms on a strong back. The shape of the boat is determined by the set of forms on the strong back. The forms are marked with chalked center lines and a shear line and are cut out of plywood. They are set up on a strong back plywood table 14 feet long and about 10 inches wide. The forms are screwed to the strong back every foot, perpendicular to the chalked center line. I made just whatever I could get. Once the inner stems are attached in place at the bow and stern, the first cedar strips are attached along the shear line on each side.
That's the rabbit. You made the rabbit.
I made the rabbit, yeah. These first strips are screwed to the edge of the form with a bead up. They're going to hold the fishing line. The idea is we want the boat to be the same side to side. The inner stems are shaped to be glued and screwed into place at the bow and stern. The curve of the first strips are checked for bulges and unfair areas. The form or its spacing can be adjusted to correct any problems before more strips are added. Looks good to me.
Yeah, I think we made her same angle, but just a little more so it's wider.
Not too much glue, just enough. About the size of a pencil lead. Take a strip, place it in the holders on the top of the form. Run a small bead of glue about the size of a pencil lead in the cove. Lift the strip out of the holder and place it on the last strip. A spring clamp will hold and seat the strips together if you're working alone. That's one. Right? One. A little bit, but it's flat this way, which is nice. If we found that it was way out of alignment or way out of whack, it may be because it's a bad strip. And right now, I can take this off again. I think it works great. I like it.
Well, actually, it's good for 2 people. One guy would have a pretty tough time, I think.
Not bad. I do it all the time. Yeah.
Yeah?
After you get so you get used to it.
It's a pretty good system.
At one end of the boat, the fishing line is tied to a screw on the strong back. It is wound around the 2 strips as you work down the boat, holding them together. At the other end, the line is clamped and cut at the shear. A dab of glue and a staple secures the strips to the inner stem. The 3rd strip is placed on the other side. The fishing line is wrapped around all 3 strips, clamped and cut. This rhythm is repeated over and over again to shape the bottom of the boat. As the cedar strips are attached up the sides of the hull towards the bottom, the fishing line is pulled over the screws in the faces of the forms. This holds the strips tightly to the forms and keeps them from buckling under the pressure of the subsequent strips. Because the next layer is going to have a wrap on it. Most people don't use fishing line to attach the strips to the forms on a cedar strip boat. They use staples in many cases, or tape or bungee cords. I use 30-pound test fishing line. It has stretch, it acts like a clamp. and I can leave it in the hull
Oh, that's great.
until it's time to take
Sand-
all of it out
sand up right
just before
Oh,
sanding.
that's not. Oh, go around this. Yeah, but then you can't cut along the shear and get them all loop release,
No, you can't.
right? That's. See, as long as we do.
It's a good idea to weave the strips at the stems, placing 2 on each side and cutting the second strip so that the other side lands flat on it and the inner stem. The strips are stapled to the forms at the top of the inner stem because at that point it's too difficult to reach around the hull with a fishing line. And up here, that goes in. The deck on the bow, they have quarter knees. Well, I don't care if we go to each of you guys right here, we only work for half an hour because glue has to. For this workshop, we built basically an interpretation of the Hubert Evans Handliner. The original boat was made using traditional methods in the 1930s. There weren't glues, epoxies, fiberglass cloth. So they would have been built with nails and rivets and wood from the beach. So this is actually not exactly the Hubert Evans boat, but it shares the same shape. And I think it gives people an opportunity to row something that would share the shape and the form of the original boat without having to build with those traditional materials. Cedar strip is a little lighter, handles the weather a little better, and it's actually the only thing I know how to build. So, so that was why I chose this method.
So shooting, it's 3/8 of an inch basically off the center. It doesn't have to be deadly exact, you know? Actually, this isn't going to be dead straight, and that's all right. We can plane it straight.
At the center line, strips are added one side at a time. Matching strips are put aside each time to complete the other side later. The ends run past the middle of the boat bottom. Once one side is completely stripped, a line is marked 3/8 inch from the center with a laser and then cut off with a handsaw. On the other side, the strips now can run long again, or they can be cut if they're near the center line.
You know, it would be a keel on that view.
How many boards is that?
There's not that much work.
About 3 of them?
Surprising what there is. So cheapest part of the whole boat.
All the staples are removed and the fishing line is cut using a utility knife just above the shear, where the mark will be hidden by the gunnel. The fishing line is now pulled out downwards to avoid breaking the cove edge. At the bow and the stem, the strip ends are cut and sanded flush with the inner stems, and an outer stem is laminated right on the boat. The stem is removed to be cut square when it's dry. A layer of tape separates the stem from the boat until we glue it later.
Absolutely perfect.
It's a tiny little well center, but at least they have some of that red tape, or where was that? That's on the I think we're going to glass and then put this stem back on after the glass. That's it.
Once both sides have been completed and the glue is dried,
I'm just gonna.
a 3/4 inch gap is marked from the first side cut and sawn to create a space for the center strip.
You want to cut from? You want to cut along this line?
Along that line, yeah.
The rough saw cuts on either side of the center line can be smoothed using a rabbet plane. A wedge between the hull and the forms enables a plane to tune the gap for a 3/4 inch square block that is glued in the center of the boat bottom. The screws at the shear are removed and the hull is ratchet clamped up against the block.
Yeah. Then you think.
5? Yeah, it is good.
Yeah, perfect. Back to the form.
Hey.
Extra height is planed off the center block, and the outside of the hull is sanded first with 60 grit, then with 80, and finally with 120. The hull is then sealed in preparation for the glass and epoxy. As soon as the sealing coat is dry, but not fully cured, 3 pieces of glass are applied, 1 each day. 1 sheet on the left, 1 on the right, and then 1 down the center. A couple of coats of epoxy are added to fill the weave of the cloth. Finally, the outer stems and the keel are glued, fit, and glassed in place with bias cut cloth.
Suck the extra epoxy out. And the other. Come on, let's get we're boat building here. And how come I'm doing this? I'm not supposed to be working. It is. It will some of this. Safety glasses. 2 parts to 1 part. 60, 30. Right?
I've been using epoxy for 3 or 4 years for building all my boats, the boats I build for other customers and for the class now. I like it because it's a plant-based instead of an oil-based, instead of a petro-based material, and it has the added advantage of being less of a toxic material, so it can be shipped by mail, which is important to me because instead of having to go all the way into Vancouver, go to a shop, order stuff there, and then pick it up, I can order this on the phone from Winnipeg, and it arrives in my post office in 3 or 4 days. It behaves just like all the premium epoxies I've used before. It's not too viscous, it wets out the cloth very well. It's a fairly slow curing epoxy, so I have plenty of time to make sure that the cloth is wet out and in place before it starts to set on me. It works fine. The keel is a solid piece of fir, about 1.5 inches square, to match the outer stem, and it's glued on the bottom of the boat, filleted into place, and then the stems are installed and everything is blended together. Then the outer ends of the keel were shaped down to match the stems, rounded over, and the whole thing was glassed onto the bottom of the boat with a piece of bias cut fiberglass cloth. Bias cut cloth folds into corners and goes over edges better than straight cut cloth or tape.
Pull it out, maybe put either the longer one or maybe just. Or did you?
The outer stems are made of 1/16 inch laminations of fir,
That makes me happy.
glued together right on the boat, separated from the hull by a layer of tape so that I can take them off later, add more laminations to them to make them thicker, and then they'll still fit, be put back on at the end of the lamination process. This way I can make the stem nice and square like the original boat would have had, and then fit it into the keel and have everything come out the same thickness and look like an original piece.
Wow.
The boat is now ready to be turned over. It is pulled off the forms and set upright on a set of slings or sawhorses in preparation for sanding the inside. Fiberglass cloth and epoxy is applied to the inside in 3 pieces, similar to the outside process. The inwales and outwales are glued up and attached at the same time using thickened epoxy. The inwales and outwales must be at the same height, and the hull should be a little higher so that it can be planed down flush later. Once the gunnels are dry and planed flush, the deck beams and deck are built and installed. A round over bit is used in the router to finish the gunnels and the edge of the deck. Oarlocks are built and installed. A ledger is glued in for the seats, and the seats are cut to fit. They will need knees to tie them into the gunnels and a center post under the middle seat for support. All the raw wood is sanded smooth and sealed with epoxy. The entire boat is sanded up to 120 grit and varnished. A brass keel strip and oarlocks are then attached just in time for the launch party. The gunnels are made of fur also. The inwales are glued up on the floor of the shop. 2 sets at once, both sides at once, with the blocks glued onto the rails, all done at once so they're symmetrical side to side. Once we've got those glued up and they've cured, then we run them through the planer to smooth them, round over the underside, because you won't be able to round this over later when they're attached to the boat. And then we trim the outwale, which is the outside part of the gunnel, a little bit at both ends so it would curve properly. And the next step was to glue the whole thing all at once into the boat. The important part about that process is the inwale and the outwale have to be at the same height, as near as possible, and the hull of the boat sticks through about a 1/16 or a 1/4 inch. 1/16 is probably best, so that you can sand the whole thing flush later and then round over all the tops.
That was too long ago, wasn't it?
Okay.
Okay, so, okay, this.
That looks pretty good.
Just stand around and smile.
Yeah.
This boat has a little foredeck. Not every boat does, but it helps hold the front of the boat, adds structure to the front of the boat. It would keep a little bit of water out of the boat if there was a little bit of wave action. We just laminated up a sheet of cedar strips, glassed the side that was going to be the bottom, and then lifted that off the form when it was dry, turned it over, and glued it to the boat. And then cut that to shape to fit the boat, and then laminated a layer of glass on top of that. So now we have a sandwich of glass on both sides, laminated onto the structure of the boat. Very strong. Under the deck, there's some deck beams. They were cut to fit the boat, and the curved part of the, aft end of the deck, the curve was laminated in place right in the boat. That's the easiest way to do it.
Not yet.
The oarlocks on this Handliner are mounted on blocks above the gunnels. Those blocks were made out of maple, big leaf maple local wood. The process basically was to rough them out on the bandsaw, cut a recess for the oarlock socket, which is bronze, and then drill a hole for the socket. They are glued and screwed to the gunnels and then finished.
This, like that. So in station, 5,
They're not really the
4,
middle.
and 3. It's 9 inches.
Yeah, 5, 4, and 3.
Because we'll have to, have to tear it all down and sand it all again. Varnish it, but- And he says they make great little locks or yeah, it's Then the first time I use them, I put great big white marks there. That's good, eh?
Yeah.
Just one more.
Come up a bit.
We don't need it. I was thinking, well, the end, very end there, it looks like it's
If you
come
move
away.
this down,
Shot them all. That worked out good for you. Clamps and riser, that's nice. Much nicer than it goes usually. Nice.
This is a really nice boat for 1 or 2 people. It was used by one guy to fish, so you know it's very stable with one in it. It's fairly light. It has a reputation for being a really good sea-keeping boat because it's double-ended, and the bow and the stern have quite a curve to the shear, so the bow and stern are high, so it'll take waves. And yet in the middle it's fairly low, so you can reach over the side to pull in fish, and that's why it was made that way. Yeah, it's a nice boat. It was a boat built for a purpose. Did that well.
Yeah, I'm gonna be there. I'm gonna be over there.
I'll go make the coffee.
Every time I run one of these boat building classes, I learn something from the students. In this case, I hadn't built a handliner for at least 3 or 4 years. This is a second handliner I built in Cedar Strip. And every night I'd come into this class and I wasn't really sure whether we would be able to complete the tasks I had sort of set for the class. And I wasn't actually sure, and many times, whether they would actually work. So I was fairly nervous, but you know, anytime we ran into a problem, we just solved that problem, and a bunch of people working together, we managed to put this boat together. And I think that's the best part of it.
It was Ryan's great-great-grandpa and his great-grandpa that used to build these boats and fish them around here. So it's kind of appropriate that he helped build one. I guess I should go for a row in this and see how it works.
Very peaceful, eh? It's nice to be able to follow the shoreline like this. You smell the water. It's beautiful. Yeah, there's nothing like being out in a boat, being on the water. Very calm and peaceful. Takes you back to the old days when you might be rowing across the water to go and get some milk and bread. And nowadays we just do it for fun, or to go and see our neighbors. But I think boating will always be important in the Pender Harbor area, just like it was back in the old days. I think it's in us. It's part of our spirit. It's who we are. I'd like to be able to share that with people who come and visit, people who maybe can't afford to have their own boat. Be able to share that experience of just being here on the water and traveling at your own pace, using your own muscle power.